Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Lean Pulse. So this topic might go a number of different directions. What we want to talk about is what is it that leaders need to know today and tomorrow? And even in coming up with the topic, it was hard for us to settle on it because what brought about the conversation was all of the articles that are coming up. John mentioned some LinkedIn articles. I've been seeing some other ones, Wall Street Journal and other places. And, what is it that leaders need to know today? And it's a plethora of all these different, well, they need to know this. They need to know this. Well, you have to do this. Well, the bottom line is leadership is about improving systems to improve outcomes. But there's a whole bunch of things that you do to be able to get better at that. Dan, I actually want to kick this off to you first because this morning we were talking about the whole concept of a leadership dojo, equivalent to a coding dojo. Do you want to recap what we were discussing and maybe your viewpoints on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to center everybody, the idea of a dojo, it comes out of martial arts, and it's the place where you drill on the fundamentals of whatever that you're studying. So
You
in
learn the kata.
the kata, the individual moves that are the toolbox of that martial art. So for judo, for example, you learn how to do a simple throw, and the your partner in the dojo learns how to fall and disperse energy so they don't hurt themselves.
Mhm.
And you do that over and over and over and over. And yes, it's very repetitious, but the idea is, as one of the core skills of that martial art, it's essential that you get those right before you move on to actually engaging with another in competition. So that idea then is extrapolated to a team of developers learning the fundamental skills in their trade. And yes, so for example, learning how to work using a test first approach, and doing that repeatedly, and doing a unit, reflecting, uh, examining what they need to work on, doing another small unit, and we're talking 15-minute little units of real work though, and through working on the fundamentals, become a profoundly stronger individual developer and stronger as a team of developers. So then we were talking about the challenge that leaders face, working in organizations where it is a it's career threatening to show that level of vulnerability often.
Mhm.
And in that world, how can we coach leaders, much in so extending the dojo metaphor, how can we build a dojo such that we can give deep levels of coaching to executive and middle manager leaders so that they can grow their leadership skills, technology leadership skills. And uh, there's some there's some challenges to that, because the dojo idea is that a the practitioner is doing real work, while examining what's working, modifying, you know, for example, if they jump into that old pattern of giving direct work direction, pulling them back, and asking them to rephrase and redirect, to have to encourage the team and guide the team to make that decision themselves, as they should, as a self-directed team. And getting to that place though requires a great deal of vulnerability, and that vulnerability can only happen in environments of very, very high trust. So there's the challenge. We need our leaders to find a path for growth. I was explaining earlier that uh, very early in my leadership career, it was very common to have very deep um, learning engagements. One firm I was with had every one of their middle and senior leaders uh, signed up for what ended up being a 3-year one-on-one and group coaching experience with a fantastic industrial psychologist who grew our leadership skills individually and as a team of leaders uh, phenomenally. It's, I still use the skills that I learned back then. So I guess that's the challenge. How can we create
Yeah.
a dojo-like environment for our middle and senior technology leaders?
And John, I want to toss it over to you in a second to bring up some of the other side topics that not really side topics, but other aspects of today's leadership demand that we were discussing. But Dan, when you were talking about that dojo concept, what I think a lot of leaders are missing, both from a opportunity standpoint as well as they can recognize that it's missing, there's a hole, there's a gap, is feedback loops. And in a dojo setting, and does it have to be a pure dojo setting? No, but when you implement something that allows leaders, as you said, to be vulnerable in a quote unquote safe space where it's no longer, not only is it no longer expected or required for them to direct work, it's looked down upon. It's
Right.
it's uh it's frowned upon. No, let's talk about what you need. Now we can build in the feedback loops. As you said, and we talked earlier in a session when we were talking about some books like Wiring the Winning Organization, they talk about slowification. Some of the examples like the Top Gun school where they could mid-exercise in flight, could pause the planes, get them wingtip to wingtip and just talk about what just happened and then try it again. And that's exactly what we need leadership to be able to do in the plane, actually flying it, doing the exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and then someone say, hold on, pause, cut. Let's time out here a second. Let's do that scene again, but let's try it this way.
Right.
Because that's how you build the right muscle memory. You guys all know that coach road racing and such, and I got to work with Nick Einach from Yamaha Champion School for quite a bit and learning from him the whole concept of practice makes permanent, not perfect. If we keep doing the same things we are doing, it just gets embedded deeper and deeper in. But when we pause and go wingtip to wingtip and look at the feedback loops and say, well, what happened when I did that? Well, it threw me off on my timing. Okay. What happened when you said this? Well, I felt like we were back in the old command and control, and I was just looking for, all right, how soon do I need to get these tasks done? And that's
Right.
not what leadership wants or needs today. So, doing that wingtip to wingtip concept and backing away from the in flight, we're actually producing and just pausing long enough to adjust and correct and improve, and then practice that till it becomes habit. That's what we're talking about. And that's a really key skill that, no, it's a key opportunity that leaders need. But John, you were talking about a different aspect of leadership, about leadership versus management, which you and I are both very much on the same page on that. What's the
Well,
difference between leadership and management?
first off, and this got triggered by the article from Fast Company that you brought up, and
Yeah.
the article is by Leah Mether, and it's a short read. It's a 3-minute read, and it's just was 3 days ago, and she mentions that good traits of a leader are clear communication, compassionate, human-centered focus, and realistic expectations. And those are all great traits, and they're all really important. But my first thought was, and it tied me back to a comment I made to somebody on LinkedIn the other day who wrote a similar post on here's this little picture of leadership. And my concern is too many folks are conflating the words leadership and management.
Mhm.
Just bottom line. And so I always refer back to, and one of the best descriptions I found was in Cotter's book, Accelerate. And this is already 10 years old now, which is amazing to me that we don't know it. But on page 16, I quote this in a bunch of classes. He says, leadership, establish direction, align people, motivate people, inspire, propel us into the future. That's leadership.
Yeah.
And all this other stuff comes after. And then we got management on the other side. And a company needs both. Because you
Yeah,
get
that's the
the
key.
management of the administration, which is
That's right.
planning, budgeting, organizing, staffing, measuring, problem solving, produce reliable, dependable results. That's management. So first off, we've got to separate them. Because how many times, shoot, I worked with this huge company and everybody was a leader, and most of them were. And by the way, I'm going to use this phrase lovingly with a smile in my voice, because I do have an MBA and I do have a specialty in finance, and that creates bean counters, not leaders.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And I was in a case study school, so they were developing leaders, but it doesn't. In real life, you start looking at what you get, and you get counters. You get people who count a bunch of stuff, count people or count dollars or count widgets or all this kind of stuff. There
And
is a
that's where we get
difference between the first
productivity
and foremost thing.
metrics and yeah.
Well,
Do we have somebody who knows where they're going, and have they got people coming behind them that they are leading? And whether you use leader follower or you go to Marquet's leader model, all
Mhm.
of these are, the leader has to know where they're going, pure and simple, first and foremost. Otherwise, they're not a leader.
Well, I want to emphasize that because I have a very simple definition. It's a bit of a paraphrase from Deming's work, but management maintains systems, leadership moves systems forward. They change systems. And you do need both. You
yeah,
need to keep the lights on. You need the bills paid. You need those beans counted. That does have to happen in a successful organization. Those people are valuable. But
yeah,
you
and
also need people that are, sorry, Dan, just a
yeah,
bit.
go ahead. Yep.
You also need people that are very much focused on the system today. What does it look like tomorrow and the next day and the next day? And that is their focus. Management has to have a different focus where they're trying to keep the lights on today. Leadership has to have a focus, which is in sometimes in almost a dichotomy. It's almost a contradiction to management. But how do we move the system forward? You need both. Rarely do you see that in one body, in one person. Very often you need management and leadership, and one of the keys is helping them to work together. Now, what I've found is true leaders, those lean agile leaders that I've had the opportunity to work with, they are very good at learning to speak management speak. They came from that field most likely. So they can talk that talk and explain it and have those right numbers that management needs to keep the lights on. But at the same time, they're conveying to them, to management, don't get too comfortable. That's what we do today. Tomorrow, we're going to do something different. And we believe it will be better. We're not positive yet, which makes management uncomfortable. But the overall outcome is those daily increments aggregate to much better outcomes for customers, better places to work. And that's one of the other skills that leadership needs that isn't called out very much is that ability to communicate back to management, the things that management needs to keep the lights on. Sorry, Dan, you wanted to add something.
Well, you got to exactly where I was going. Having, if you have strong leaders backed by uh, supporting managers, it's critical that the that's a concert and not just a bunch of individual musicians,
Concert, I love
um,
that. Yes.
because it is, um, I guess, comically dysfunctional when they are not working well together, and but tragically, because the organization is going to fail,
Yeah.
or it's going to have to go through some level of upheaval before they get to a place where those two are working
Or
effectively.
almost worse, Dan, if I can jump in,
Yeah,
they're limping along and don't realize they're limping. They think they're sprinting. That's
yeah,
almost the worst scenario.
I agreed, and all three of us have seen those sort of organizations where they, I tell my coaches and students all the time that this idea that as humans, we don't change until we are sufficiently dissatisfied with our status quo. And for some people, I think the three of us in this camp will change on the turn of pretty much any dime. uh, Other people really need to be greatly dissatisfied with their status quo before they're willing to endure what to them feels like a lot of pain, that pain of change. But we all need to get to that point. So in an organization that, to your point, it feels like they're sprinting, but we look at them and they're like, well, you're sprinting, but you don't realize that you're towing a sled behind you. It's like, cut it loose, man. You know, you're working so hard and you're not getting anywhere near as far as you should. But from their perspective, they don't see it.
Well, and I think that's what ties together. We started this podcast off with, where is this going? I think we've discovered where it's going. It's not a big surprise. Leadership have so many things to focus on today. And that's where I have a huge amount of empathy, especially for leadership today, is I've been in those leadership positions. Dan, you've been in those. John, you've been in those positions. Think about being in that position today with all of the pressures, all of the forces. And we've always had the financial forces on us as leadership. But now, appropriately so, we have the sociological, we have the cultural pressures on us now, such as the article about realistic expectations and compassionate human centered focus. Whoa, wait a minute. You need me to make this company profitable, and I have to be nice to people. I have to build an environment where people like to work in. That's a tough thing. But the bottom line is everything is focused, and I don't want to take away from the human side of this, but everything is focused on improving business outcomes. And if we're not doing that, all of those other things, they do not make any addition at all. But the bottom line is those are additive to delivering business value. When we talk about empathy and we talk about working with people, don't treat people like resources. Stop using the term resource when it's tied to a person.
Amen.
Those are really good moral and cultural things to do, but they're also hugely beneficial to the bottom line. So it's one of those things you can do the right thing and feel really good about doing it. But how do you do that? And I want to toss this back to both of you. John, we'll start with you first, but how do you do that in today's culture, organizational, business speed, all of that? How do you pause, look at all of the things you should be adding to your toolbox, all of the skills you need to get better at, and pick which one you should focus on first?
Well, it's actually a scary thought. And I'm trying to pose this in just the table from Cotter's book. So my first thing is this is, and Dwayne, you've mentioned a couple times, a leader's looking at how do they move a system forward in the context of the current world environments, their current market environments, and the new stuff. And this actually ties in with, the blue ocean strategy we were talking the other day. Where are we going? What are the new stuff we're going in? So now we get into this leader position. And so now you have a leader that says, we need to shift this way. And in the news recently, there was a huge company that laid off 1,800 folks to shift this way.
Mm-hmm.
From a lean perspective, that says we're changing our development value streams. We're supporting this. Instead of that, we're moving money. That says we've got to communicate that. That is communication. We've got to, if we're communicating with people, if we're dealing with people, how do we do that nicely? Bottom line, that leader has to figure out, do we have the things in place to actually do that and not be, the curt leader with respect to it, but it's still in the form of leadership. And again, and you got to go back to Greenleaf's work on this and in his essays on servant leadership. He talks about how this, and this is John's interpretation of what Greenleaf said. Look, you have leaders on one side, you have servants on the other side. And to John, there's a slider that goes all the way across, kind of like a slider in Microsoft Excel that says, where am I on that? Am I a servant? Am I a leader? Am I servant leader or leader servant? Wherever. Everybody's on that spectrum somewhere. And you have to figure out, given where I'm at, what's the most important thing we have to deal with today? And do I have the things today to deal with that? If you've got a problem, and in today's news, and I saw that an airline is getting rid of a couple hundred pilots because they lost almost 200 million last quarter as compared with only losing 2 million a year ago in the same quarter. That's a problem both for leadership and for management. So now we've got a leadership problem. Where are we going and why isn't our current thing working? Where do we have to change our system in order to make it work? The management side is, hey, we're counting and we're not coming up with the right numbers. What are we going to do? How do you deal with 200 layoffs?
Yeah.
Two different perspectives of that same problem and figuring out what skill set do I need in order to account for it quickly and to deal with it quickly.
So you
So,
talked about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, go for it.
You talked about communication to start that off. And that's one of the core skills, because what I want this to wrap up, this podcast session to wrap up with, is not what you read in books, but what should I actually go out and do today? What real world action should I take today? And that first one is learn how to communicate. And to make that more specific, what is it you are communicating? What do my teams, what do my people need to know? What information are they lacking, both about our direction, our strategy, and our constraints, the things that we're dealing with? What are the competitors doing? Is making sure that that is communicated. And I'm not talking about a poster on a wall by the elevator. I'm talking about those engaged town hall kinds of things. I'm talking about really doing the Gemba walks to go and communicate. If you're conveying a message, the only way to know it's effective is to go listen and learn, and to go ask groups of people and visit. In Team of Teams, General McChrystal and his co-authors talked about going out to visit the troops. And when they would go to different bases, the expectation is, as a commanding general, that McChrystal would go and meet with leadership first. He went and grabbed a recruit. He went and grabbed a private, a staff sergeant, someone like that, and said, "Hey, come over here. Let's talk for a bit." And of course, that soldier was a little nervous at first, but they got used to it, because that's what McChrystal did. That's similar to what Marquet did, what really good, healthy leaders do. I have a good friend of mine who is a now retired U.S. Navy captain, and he talks about doing the same things. Is I've conveyed our strategy and our direction and our constraints. I want to make sure you understand that it's clear. And I also want feedback loops on, is this not only being conveyed well, but two, are there things I'm missing? And that's what McChrystal was looking for. Hey, this is our strategy. From your boots on the ground perspective, what is it we are missing?
Hey, Dwayne,
Yes, John.
on that. So in that airline example, real life, my question in the back of my mind, we don't see this because we see it from the outside looking in, unless we're actually working with the
Yeah, in the
company.
news articles and
We
everything.
see the news articles,
Right,
but a
right.
question I would have of somebody like you just mentioned, gosh, if we were inside that company, if was that
Ooh.
communicated to us ahead of time? Did we know? Did everybody know, hey, our results are terrible?
Or did we
We have a
find out from the
problem.
news post, the news
Yeah,
clippings?
right.
Right. We can't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and is the company being vulnerable enough to say, look, our execution's off. We're working. We still believe the vision is optimal or whatever, but our execution is off, and these are the challenges that we're having. And be uh, to the Dwayne's point about McChrystal, I'm sure every once in a while he got a sergeant that gave him all the well. In fact, in his book,
He talks.
McChrystal talks about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
getting a real earful, and
Yes.
I've had an earful before. I had a team of scrum masters about 3 weeks ago when some people were on summer holiday. So some other things were going. Don't details aren't important, but um, I asked the question, and boy, did they! I got the earful. Um, but to loop this back to the earlier discussion, I got the earful because they knew that when I say I can't fix a problem I can't find, I need to know where are the blind spots, what are the problems, and uh, yeah, boy did I hear them, but I heard them because they knew, number one, I wasn't going to tell them that they were crazy. They knew that I was going to respect their opinion, even if I didn't always agree with it.
You might
Um,
disagree, right?
yeah, that's just, we all have perspectives, but if you want the intelligence that is necessary to improve your business outcomes, you need to be vulnerable to to hearing that raw truth, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's hard.
That reminds me of forget where I read it yesterday. It was responses from mechanics to airline pilot complaints, equipment complaints. And they were all across the board, all fairly humorous. One was really funny. The pilot said it flies erratically, and the ground crew said cannot reproduce on the ground, to something to that effect. And that ties into one of the quotes we have on our website: data without observation is half the equation. And if I could give any direct feedback to leaders to really change what they do, those physical, real actions they can take, is go see. And what you're going to find at first, if you go visit a team planning session, if you go look in on a system demo or something like that, the first reality you're going to find is based on the culture. Most likely, they will act differently because you are in the room. And you need to work through that. And some of it is verbal, some of it is nonverbal cues, but you need to work through that so that these people feel like it's just Dan. It's not Mr. Leahy, the senior VP. It's just Dan, and he's here to help. It takes time to build that, but you have to get started. Another coach I've worked with before had a really good concept. A leader was asking him when they should start this. He said, well, you want a shade tree in your front yard. When should you have planted it? 20 years ago. So get started now. It's going to take time to build that culture where they recognize your people recognize that you are there to help, not to direct, not to manage, if you will, but you have to get started. Let's wrap this one up, guys. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Dan, I'll toss it over to you first. Any real guidance you would want leadership to think about how do you move forward in today's world?
Uh, Embrace the discomfort.
Yeah.
We all have blind spots, and our the, the fear as a leader is that if we don't project strength, we'll lose the confidence of our teams. But inevitably, what you experience is that by showing vulnerability, not weakness, but vulnerability,
Mhm.
that you're willing to hear those difficult messages, that the respect that the team has for you grows, particularly if you either empower them to take action on those difficult things, or if it's something out of their scope, that you take it seriously, and to the extent that we can address them, um, cue them for addressing.
Yeah. Vulnerability requires courage. Courage is always respected. John.
No, I think we've said it all. As the a person who wants to move from that management role of, counting stuff to leading, they've got to figure out what are they stepping into and where are they leading towards.
Yeah. And
And if
that's
they,
having, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, all these thoughts are flooding to me. And, the examples that we see literally every day in the press, there is some bad news out there right now. And
Scary.
the question that I would have of a person in that place, whether they're ELT or SLT or somebody at those levels, is so do people know what your thoughts are on getting out of this mess?
Yeah. And do they know the approach, the direction, and do they have input into it? Because it's that whole adage back to, and Marquet talked about it, but it's been around for a long time. If you're trying to solve a problem alone, that's one single brain. When you engage the entire organization, it's hundreds to thousands of brains, all looking at it from different perspectives. Not all of that data input is valid or is usable, consumable. But to open those doors is how you get those really good opportunities. Don't try to be that one brain solving every problem. Open it up, have that vulnerability. It requires courage. That's respected. And that's where you get the real feedback loops that are needed. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Great session. I knew we'd end up with a really good outcome from this because we're all very passionate about it. So, thanks for the conversation. We'll see you on the next one.
Take care.